Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we are venturing into the frozen heart of Canada, where endless wilderness stretches beyond the reach of help. And the cold is not the only thing that will chill you to the bone. From desolate highways, where the dead still hitchhike, to ancient forests where something far worse than wolves stalks between the trees, these 7 accounts will reveal why the Great White North harbors some of the darkest secrets on this continent. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the frozen wilderness of Canada, where isolation is absolute. And the things that watch from the shadows have been waiting far longer than we have been here. Northern Ontario is known for its endless forests, vast, deep, quiet. The kind of place where nature feels untouched and silence settles like a blanket over the land. It's beautiful, until you realize how easily someone can disappear inside it. How quickly sound fades, how fast a person can vanish without a trace. This story begins with a small, isolated cabin near the edge of a frozen lake. A place meant for peace, but remembered for fear. 2 friends, Mark and Daniel, had planned a weekend getaway. They were experienced hikers, used to the cold and familiar with the northern trails. They wanted to disconnect from the world, breathe fresh air, and enjoy the calm of the woods. They arrived on a Friday afternoon, unloaded their bags, lit the old wood stove, and settled in for what they thought would be a quiet weekend. The first night was normal. A soft snowfall, the crackling of firewood, and the stillness only deep forests can hold. But sometime after midnight, Mark wrote a strange note in his journal. Only 1 sentence. Something is moving outside. The next morning, both men left the cabin to explore a nearby trail. The sun hadn't fully risen, and the sky was a pale blue, cold and empty. Their footprints were the only marks in the fresh snow. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher. Then it began to set. But the 2 men never returned. When the cabin owner came by the next day to check on them, he found the door slightly open. Inside, the fire had burned out. Their jackets were gone. Their backpacks were gone. But their phones were still on the table. That was the first sign something was wrong. Search teams arrived quickly. Rangers, helicopters, volunteers, everyone joined the hunt. The woods were silent. The wind was sharp and cold, freezing the breath of every searcher. The only sounds were boots crunching in snow, dogs barking faintly, and radios crackling in the distance. Soon, searchers found something chilling. Not far from the cabin, they discovered a small clearing where the snow was disturbed. Footprints, 2 sets, leading deeper into the forest. But then, suddenly, the footprints split apart. Mark's prints continued straight, while Daniel's veered sharply to the right. What frightened the rescue team wasn't the split, it was what came after. Mark's footprints stopped, completely, as if he had simply vanished into the air. No sign of a struggle, no dragging, no blood, just nothing. The snow ahead was untouched. Daniel's trail was even stranger. His footprints became uneven, almost as if he started running or stumbling. They circled a few times, then continued toward a thicket of trees. But before they reached the trees, they also stopped. 2 men, 2 trails, both ending in the middle of untouched snow. Searchers couldn't understand it. No animal prints, no human prints, no snowmobile tracks. Just silent, frozen emptiness. Locals began telling stories. Stories they had kept quiet for years, stories about strange shapes moving between the trees, about eerie noises echoing through the forest on winter nights, about campers waking up to see pale figures standing far away. Watching, always watching. One old trapper came forward. He said that for decades, people had reported something in that area. Something tall, something quiet, something that moved without leaving tracks, something that didn't want strangers in its woods. The investigation continued for weeks. Hundreds of people combed through miles and miles of thick forest, icy lakes, and rocky terrain. But no bodies were ever found. No clothing, no equipment, not a single clue. Their families begged for answers. Officers could only repeat the same painful line. We found no evidence. Without evidence, no explanation could be confirmed. Not an animal attack, not foul play, not an accident, just disappearance. The cabin was abandoned after that. No one wanted to rent it anymore. Locals say that even now, years later, hikers passing through the area sometimes feel watched. They describe sudden cold winds, even when the air is still. They describe hearing footsteps behind them. Footsteps that stop the moment they turn around. Some say the forest took the two men. Others believe something else got to them first. But one thing is certain. In northern Ontario, you don't have to go far to lose yourself. Sometimes, all it takes is a few steps off the trail, and the woods decide you're not leaving. In the days before Mark and Daniel vanished, small things began happening. Things so subtle that most people would ignore them. But in the isolation of a frozen forest, even the smallest sound becomes impossible to forget. On their first morning, as they prepared to hike, Mark heard something faint, a soft crunching, like footsteps moving slowly across snow. He stepped outside, expecting to see a deer or maybe another hiker passing by. But there was nothing. Only the stillness of tall trees and the sharp bite of winter air. The forest stood silent, as if holding its breath. Daniel brushed it off. "Probably an animal," he said. But Mark wasn't convinced. The rhythm of the sound had been too steady, too deliberate. Not the quick, scattered steps of wildlife, but slow, heavy movements. The next morning, they discovered something they couldn't ignore. Near the tree line behind the cabin, the snow was disturbed, not by animals, but by long, uneven marks, as if something had been dragged lightly across the ground. No clear footprints, just strange lines curled in odd patterns, looping around trees and disappearing into the woods. Daniel bent down to study the marks. "What kind of animal does this?" he whispered. Mark didn't answer. He was looking further ahead, at a single deep footprint pressed into the snow. One print, human-shaped, larger than any normal boot. And the oddest part, only one print existed. No pair, no path leading to it or away from it. Just one heavy impression, standing alone. As they explored more around the cabin, things got stranger. Inside, Daniel noticed his compass was missing. Then Mark realized his flashlight was gone too. Equipment they kept on the table just hours earlier had vanished. They searched the cabin twice, checked their bags, checked outside. Nothing. Later, Daniel opened the old wooden shed beside the cabin, hoping the item somehow ended up there. He froze. Someone, or something, had moved the firewood. The neatly stacked pile was now scattered across the floor, as if tossed by strong hands. And there, in the corner, half buried in snow that had blown through a crack, was Mark's missing flashlight. Standing upright, pointed toward the forest, Mark picked it up slowly. It was ice cold. Too cold for something that had been indoors the night before. The two men exchanged a look. a silent agreement that something wasn't right. That evening, as the sky darkened and the wind grew sharper, the forest around them seemed to shift. The trees creaked, the snow crunched in strange patterns, and from far away, barely audible beneath the howl of the wind, they heard it again. Footsteps, not rushed, not panicked, slow, heavy, moving with purpose. The sound grew clearer, then faded, then returned from a different direction. Every time they stepped outside, the noise vanished. Every time they went back in, it started again. Mark wrote one more line in his journal that night. "It feels like the forest is getting closer." They tried to sleep, but the wind outside carried a low, hollow sound, something between a whisper and a distant call, a sound that didn't belong to any animal they knew. By morning, they realized the forest wasn't just surrounding them, it was closing in. By the third day, the tension around the cabin felt unbearable. The forest was colder, the air was sharper. Even the silence seemed tighter, as if the woods were listening to every breath. Mark and Daniel decided they couldn't stay another night. They packed quickly, moving with the kind of urgency people feel when they know something is terribly wrong, something they can't explain, but can sense closing in. Their plan was simple: leave early, follow the main trail back to the road, and reach safety before sunset. But they never made it. When rescue teams later searched the area, they didn't begin with the cabin. They started with the trail, and that's when they found it. An abandoned campsite deep within the forest, a place neither man had planned to visit. The campsite sat in a hollow where the trees grew close together, bending their frozen branches like an arch. The snow around it was uneven, crushed and disturbed, as if something had moved through it in a hurry or in a struggle. At the center lay a torn backpack belonging to Daniel. It was ripped open, its contents scattered. A water bottle tossed far away, a torn map half buried in snow, and Mark's journal pages fluttering in the wind like pale leaves. The final page was smudged, the ink blurred by moisture, but one sentence was still readable. "We saw something." Searchers also found footprints around the campsite, but they didn't make sense. There were 3 types: Mark's, Daniel's, and a third set that stopped everyone in their tracks. These prints were longer, wider, deeper, as if made by something heavy. But the shape was wrong. Too long to be a normal foot, too narrow to be a bear, too defined to be an accident. They were spaced far apart, almost unnaturally, and they circled the campsite in wide, deliberate loops. One ranger whispered, "Whatever made those was watching them." Nearby, a tree had deep scratches running down its trunk, long, jagged marks that cut through the bark like claws. But the pattern was strange, too organized, too vertical, more like something marking territory or sending a warning. The snow closer to the fire pit told another story. Signs of a struggle. Boot prints overlapping, patches of snow kicked up violently. A torn piece of cloth stuck on a broken branch, a glove lying far away, as if thrown or ripped off. And then, nothing. The tracks, the chaos, the evidence of fear, all ended abruptly at the edge of the clearing. As if all movement had suddenly stopped, as if the forest had swallowed everything. Rescue teams debated endlessly. Some believed it was a human attack, maybe a hidden drifter living deep in the woods. Someone who hunted or stalked campers. Someone silent and dangerous. Others thought it was an animal, though no one could agree on what kind. No bear or wolf left prints like the ones found that day. No known creatures circled campsites with deliberate intention. No predator moved without leaving a trail. But whisper by whisper, team by team, The rumors began to grow because the prints didn't continue. They didn't lead away. They didn't fade out slowly like normal tracks. They simply stopped, as if whatever made them had lifted itself off the ground, as if it wasn't bound by the rules of the forest or the rules of nature. Some searchers felt watched as they investigated. Others reported hearing faint footsteps behind them, only to turn and see empty trees. A few said the wind carried something strange, a low hum, almost like a distant voice. Even hardened rangers cut the search early that day, not because they were tired, but because they felt something was wrong. Something was off. Something in the forest didn't want them there. And as the sun dipped behind the trees, a deep, freezing wind swept through the clearing, sending a shiver down every spine. It felt like a warning, a final reminder that Mark and Daniel hadn't simply wandered off. Something had found them, and whatever it was still out there, hidden among the silent trees and icy shadows of northern Ontario. When news of Mark and Daniel's disappearance reached the nearest town, the community reacted with a mix of fear and disbelief. Northern Ontario was used to winter hardships, dangerous ice, lost hikers, wildlife encounters. But this was different. People whispered in grocery stores. Parents kept their children indoors. Older locals shook their heads and said the forest had finally taken back what didn't belong. And everyone, no matter how calm they pretended to be, felt the same uneasy truth. Something was wrong in those woods. Police arrived quickly, setting up a full investigation with dozens of officers, search dogs, trackers, and helicopters. They interviewed the cabin owner, combed through maps, and tried to piece together the last known movements of the two men. But the deeper they looked, the more confusing the case became. Inside the cabin, they found untouched belongings: phones, wallets, food, items no one would abandon in freezing temperatures. The small wood stove was cold, as if it hadn't been used in days, and Mark's last journal lines sent chills down every officer's spine. Something is moving outside. It feels like the forest is getting closer. The search expanded for miles. Officers moved through icy trails where their own footsteps echoed loudly against the frozen ground. They pushed deeper into silent forests where the air felt heavier, as if the trees themselves were guarding secrets. But they found nothing. No bodies, no signs of life. No trace of where the men went after the abandoned campsite. The footprints, those strange, wide, heavy impressions, became the center of debate. Some officers insisted it must have been a large animal. Maybe a moose, they said, or a bear with a strange gait. But no one could explain the shape. No one could explain why the prints showed clear impact, but no exit trail. No one could explain how they stopped, mid-step. Others believed a human was involved, a violent, hidden figure living off-grid, waiting for easy targets. But that theory had its own problems. No tracks, no shelters, no food remnants, no signs of human activity anywhere. And then there were the locals, people who lived near those forests for generations. People who knew the land better than anyone. They told officers not to search at night. They warned them about the quiet hours, the time after sunset, when even animals stayed silent. They spoke of tall shapes seen through trees, strange calls in the wind, and shadows moving without sound. Police dismissed it all as superstition, but they refused to let their search teams work after dark. In the town, fear spread slowly, like frost creeping up a window. Campers canceled trips, hunters avoided the trails. Even seasoned outdoorsmen refused to enter the forest alone. The cabin where Mark and Daniel stayed was eventually boarded up, first temporarily, then permanently. The investigation stretched on for months. Reports were written, evidence was analyzed, experts came and went. But every path led to the same place. Nowhere. Eventually, with heavy hearts and no answers, the case was closed as unresolved. Not solved, not explained, just unresolved. Families were left with questions that still linger today. Community members still whisper about the two men whenever winter falls and the forest grows quiet again. And hikers who wander too far north claim the area feels strange, colder than the rest of the woods, even on mild days. Some say they feel watched. Others swear they hear footsteps behind them that stop when they turn around. But one detail, passed from ranger to ranger, remains the most unsettling. When the rescue team revisited the abandoned campsite weeks later, the strange, heavy footprints had reappeared, fresh, deep, circling the clearing again, as if whatever had been there once had come back. Toronto, a city of towering skyscrapers, bustling streets, and endless neon lights. By day, it's full of life. People rushing to work, laughter spilling from cafes, the hum of a city that never stops. But by night, something changes. The streets empty, the lights flicker, and the underground becomes a different world entirely. The subway, a place designed for convenience, for moving millions through the city safely and quickly. But in the late hours, it can become a place of fear. Quiet stations, echoing tunnels, and trains that arrive empty, only to carry shadows along with passengers. It was one of those late-night rides that began the story of the Toronto subway phantom. Jennifer, a university student, was returning from a late shift. She entered the station just after midnight, her backpack slung over her shoulder, her headphones playing soft music to keep her calm. The platform was empty except for a few security cameras flickering with dim light. The trains had become infrequent. Silence stretched across the tiled walls like a thick, suffocating fog. As she waited, she noticed him, or rather, the figure. At first, she thought it was just another late-night commuter. A man standing at the far end of the platform, motionless. His coat was dark, blending into the shadows. But something about him made her uneasy. He didn't move. He didn't breathe visibly. And every time she looked away, he seemed closer, though she knew he hadn't moved an inch. The train arrived with a low roar, lights flashing across the platform. Jennifer stepped inside and glanced back. The man wasn't on the platform anymore. The doors closed. She exhaled a shaky breath, telling herself she was imagining it. But as the train rumbled underground, she noticed reflections in the glass. At first, a shadow behind her seat. Then, two shadows. She turned, but the car was empty. No one sat behind her. No one entered after she did. Only the faint whisper of the train's wheels over the rails. And then she heard it. A low voice, almost a whisper, echoing somewhere in the empty car. "Get out!" Her heart raced. She spun around. No one was there. The train continued its descent into darkness. Other passengers have reported similar experiences. Late-night commuters speak of a tall, thin figure who appears out of nowhere, always standing at the far end of a platform or silently following through a subway car. Witnesses describe it as pale, faceless, wearing dark clothing, moving without sound. Cameras occasionally catch glimpses of something that can't be explained, shadowy forms that vanish before the train arrives at the next stop. Toronto transit authorities dismissed most reports as hoaxes or imagination. But the city's night workers knew better. Janitors, security guards, and subway staff all described strange encounters. doors opening by themselves, lights flickering, the feeling of being watched in empty tunnels, the soft, echoing footsteps that never match the number of people present. Some reports are more chilling than others. One security guard claimed he followed the figure through the concourse, trying to confront it. The figure didn't run. It didn't hide. And when he turned the corner, it simply vanished, leaving only the faint smell of cold air and the metallic tang of something unseen. Psychologists and experts debated whether it was mass hysteria, stress, or an urban legend given life by fear. But people who ride the subway late at night swear by their experiences. And no one, not even police, could explain the strange footage occasionally captured by the subway cameras. A tall, shadowy shape standing alone in empty corridors, vanishing the moment anyone approaches. For Jennifer, the encounter changed how she traveled. She avoided late-night trains, taking longer routes home. She began walking to her station during daylight, keeping to well-lit areas. But she never forgot that feeling of being watched, followed, and yet completely alone. The Toronto subway phantom remains a mystery. Some say it is the restless spirit of someone who died underground, seeking company in the tunnels. Others believe it is something more sinister, something that only appears to those who travel alone, vulnerable, in the dead hours of the night. The city continues to hum, oblivious to the darkness beneath. But late at night, when the last train departs, when the echo of wheels fades into tunnels that seem to stretch forever, some commuters swear they see him again. The tall, faceless figure, waiting, watching, always moving silently in the shadows of Toronto's subway system. After Jennifer's encounter, reports began surfacing from other late-night commuters. People who rode the subway alone when the stations were nearly empty started sharing the same unsettling experiences, stories that made even seasoned travelers hesitate before stepping onto the platforms. It usually began subtly, a flicker in the corner of the eye, a dark silhouette standing motionless at the far end of a platform, watching from the shadows. The figure didn't move like a human, didn't fidget or glance at the approaching train. It simply waited, silent, still, unblinking. Many commuters described the same feeling, an oppressive awareness as if the air itself was heavier, a chill creeping up their necks. The sensation that someone, or something, was following them, always just out of reach. One man, a night shift worker, reported walking from Union Station to St. George when he noticed it. The figure mirrored his every movement, keeping just far enough behind that he couldn't turn around without losing sight of it. And when he did glance back, the figure was gone. Vanished. Not even a shadow left on the cold tiles of the station. Others spoke of whispers, soft, unintelligible voices echoing through empty corridors. Not announcements, not train sounds. Just faint, chilling whispers that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Sometimes the voices mimicked familiar sounds, footsteps, soft murmurs, even laughter. But distorted, hollow, unnerving. Subway staff shared their own experiences. Security guards working late nights in the control rooms reported cameras picking up movement in empty stations. Doors opening and closing, shadows shifting along walls, and figures that appeared for only a few frames before disappearing entirely. Occasionally, the figure would seem to react to passengers' movements. Commuters swore that when they walked faster, the shadow quickened. When they stopped, it stopped. When they turned a corner, it was always waiting at the next intersection. Always just out of reach, always watching. The urban legend spread quietly. Some said it was the ghost of a construction worker who had fallen in the tunnels decades ago. Others whispered about something more sinister, a being drawn to the loneliness of late-night travelers, feeding on fear itself. People began taking precautions. They traveled in pairs, avoided certain stations, or simply waited for the daylight hours. But the phantom remained elusive, unpredictable, and uncatchable. And for those who had seen it, the memory lingered long after they left the subway. That feeling of being stalked, that soft, echoing whisper, that unnerving certainty that the figure wasn't just a shadow, and the station wasn't just a station. Some say the Toronto subway phantom is still out there, waiting for the next lone passenger to step onto the platform when the city sleeps, silent in the shadows and watching. It all came to a head one Friday night, when the subway system was nearly deserted. A security guard named Leo was doing his usual patrol through the quiet stations, checking platforms and stairwells. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, and the only sounds were the distant rumble of an empty train and the echo of his own footsteps. As he reached an empty concourse, Leo noticed movement near a corner where no passenger should have been. A shadow, thin and elongated, flickered just beyond the reach of the light. He called out, expecting a late-night wanderer or maybe a maintenance worker, but no one answered. And then the first inexplicable event occurred. A passenger's backpack, resting on a bench, lifted slightly as if by an invisible hand. The straps shifted, and a water bottle rolled off the edge. Leo froze. His radio crackled, but no one responded. A gust of wind, or something like it, swept through the station, cold and sudden, even though all the entrances were closed. Moments later, the doors of the stairwell slammed shut with a deafening bang. The sound echoed through the empty tunnels, making the floor vibrate beneath his feet. Leo rushed toward them, expecting a malfunction, but the doors were locked tight from the inside. No one was there. Similar incidents began to pile up that night. Commuters who had waited for trains alone reported backpacks and personal items moving on their own. Phones fell from benches. Headphones were ripped from ears. The faint hum of a train could be heard in tunnels that weren't in service. Lights flickered in synchronization, as if signaling to something unseen. One man claimed he saw the shadow step directly onto the platform, then vanish mid-stride. Another said he felt a cold hand brush his shoulder, but when he turned, there was no one. The recurring pattern was the same. A presence, unseen yet undeniable, accompanied by the sudden disappearance of objects and slamming doors that no human hand could explain. Subway cameras captured fleeting frames, blurs that moved unnaturally fast, bending around corners, vanishing before anyone could approach. Employees reviewed hours of footage, only to see shadows stretch and twist in impossible ways, leaving the feeling that the station itself was alive, reshaping the space around them. The city's late-night commuters grew cautious. People avoided the subway after dark. Security teams doubled shifts. Yet reports persisted, whispered in corridors, told in hushed tones. The phantom never followed a pattern, never stayed in one place. It appeared only to those alone, preying on the silence and emptiness of the underground. The climax of that night, according to multiple eyewitnesses, came when Leo finally attempted to confront it. Standing in the center of the platform, he shouted, demanding it show itself. The lights flickered violently. Doors slammed shut along the tracks. The shadow appeared at the far end, motionless, towering, and impossibly still. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished. No trace, no footprints, no evidence. Only the lingering chill in the air and the unmistakable certainty that someone or something had been there. By the time morning came, the city's commuters had returned, oblivious to the events of the night. But those who had experienced it carried the memory of shadows, vanished belongings, and slamming doors that obeyed no human logic. The Toronto subway phantom had claimed another night, leaving fear in its wake. And the unanswered question: how many more nights would it remain hidden, watching from the darkness beneath the city streets after that fateful night? The story of the Toronto subway phantom spread quietly, whispered among late-night commuters, security staff, and transit workers. While authorities remained publicly skeptical, those who traveled the subway during the dead hours knew better. Something was lurking beneath the city streets. Unconfirmed sightings became routine. Solo passengers reported glimpsing a tall, faceless figure in the corners of dimly lit platforms, vanishing the moment they tried to get a closer look. Some said they heard whispers echoing from tunnels where no one else was present, faint words that seemed to warn, or perhaps beckon. Subway employees began sharing accounts too. Janitors who cleaned empty stations at night spoke of lights flickering erratically, doors slamming on their own, and objects mysteriously displaced, backpacks, phones, even tools, moved in ways that defied logic. Many admitted to avoiding certain corridors, especially those in the older, less frequented parts of the system, where shadows clung to the walls longer and the hum of the tunnels seemed heavier. Local news picked up some of the reports, dismissing them as urban legends or overactive imaginations. But police occasionally issued warnings, urging commuters to travel in pairs after midnight and avoid isolated stations. They could offer no explanations, and they could provide no protection against an entity that seemed to vanish before any human intervention. The legend grew. Online forums filled with eyewitness accounts, drawings of a faceless figure, and chilling personal testimonies. Stories varied slightly. Some described the figure as cloaked in dark clothing. Others said it had impossibly long limbs or moved silently across the ceiling of subway cars. But the consensus was unanimous. Anyone who saw it alone felt an overwhelming, almost supernatural sense of being watched. Commuters adjusted their routines. Some avoided late-night trains entirely. Others rode with friends, keeping their eyes on every shadow. And yet, those brave, or unlucky, enough to ride alone, continued to encounter it. A fleeting glimpse between tunnels, a whisper over the roar of the rails, a sudden chill that made the hair on their neck stand on end. Even today, the Toronto subway phantom remains a figure of mystery. To the city, it's an urban legend. To those who felt its presence, it is a silent predator, patiently waiting in the shadows beneath the streets, unseen but ever present, reminding everyone that even in the heart of a bustling metropolis, darkness can exist, and it can watch you closely. On the rugged coast of Nova Scotia, where waves crash violently against jagged cliffs and the wind howls with a voice older than the rocks themselves, there stands a lighthouse. Tall, white, and weathered by centuries of salt and storm, it has guided countless sailors to safety, or so the stories say. By day, it is a picturesque landmark. Tourists visit taking photos with the ocean spray in their hair. But at night, the lighthouse becomes something else entirely. Remote, isolated, and surrounded by endless fog that rolls in from the Atlantic like a living blanket. It is a place where light struggles to penetrate the darkness, and where death has left its mark. For decades, the lighthouse has been notorious for unexplained deaths and disappearances. Keepers have vanished without a trace. Boats have been found wrecked nearby, with no survivors and no explanation. And locals, who have lived along the coast for generations, whisper of something that watches from the cliffs, waiting for those foolish enough to venture too close after nightfall. The story begins with a young keeper named Thomas. Assigned to the lighthouse for the first time, he arrived in late autumn when the storms began to churn more violently and the nights grew longer. The ferry that brought him across the choppy waters dropped him off at the rocky shore. From a distance, the lighthouse seemed welcoming, its light piercing the fog like a beacon of hope. But as he climbed the narrow, spiraling staircase inside, the air felt thick, heavy, and almost alive. The first night was quiet. Too quiet. The sound of waves crashing against rocks should have been constant. But Thomas noticed stretches of eerie silence, as if the ocean itself held its breath. And then he began to hear noises that didn't belong to the wind. Soft, dragging footsteps on the deck outside. Low murmurs carried faintly through the fog, and the faint creak of the old lantern moving when the storm should have kept it still. By the second night, Thomas found marks along the lighthouse's railing. Scratches, deep and jagged, like claws trying to climb upward. Objects inside the lighthouse shifted overnight. Ropes coiled differently, tools missing from their hooks. A logbook moved from its shelf. Each morning, he felt watched, though he was always alone. Local legends spoke of a previous keeper, decades earlier, who had gone mad and vanished inside the lighthouse, leaving only strange symbols scratched into the walls. Some said his spirit lingered, angry and restless. Others believed something older than humans, the spirit of the sea itself, haunted the lighthouse, claiming those who were too curious or too brave. Thomas tried to ignore it. He focused on his duties, lighting the lantern each night, keeping the lens clean, maintaining the signal that saved countless ships. But the fog grew heavier. Shadows lengthened unnaturally. And every night, the lighthouse seemed to breathe, to pulse with a presence unseen. One night, as a storm raged, Thomas went to the top deck to secure the lantern. The wind whipped around him, nearly pushing him to the rocks below. That's when he saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the cliff, barely visible through the sheets of rain and mist. Pale, tall, and unmoving. It seemed to watch him, waiting. Thomas's heart pounded. He blinked, and the figure was gone. Hours later, the lantern light began to flicker violently, though the storm had calmed. Shadows danced along the walls, forming shapes that seemed almost human. A cold, damp hand appeared to brush his shoulder. But when he turned, no one was there. The logbook pages fluttered open by themselves, and a single message had appeared, scrawled in handwriting that wasn't his own. You should not be here. Terrified, Thomas tried to leave the lighthouse the next morning, but the storm had changed the tide. The boat could not reach him. Days passed. Supplies ran low. The presence in the lighthouse grew stronger, more insistent. Whispers echoed in the stairwell, faint but urgent. Cold gusts moved through the walls, carrying voices that promised danger to anyone who lingered. When the ferry finally returned, Thomas was found sitting at the top of the lighthouse, staring blankly out at the ocean. He could not speak of what he had seen, but the locals knew. He had glimpsed what had haunted the lighthouse for generations. Others who stayed after him would report strange lights moving along the cliffs, eerie figures vanishing into fog, and the sensation of being followed, even when they were alone. The haunted lighthouse of Nova Scotia remains one of the most feared locations on Canada's coast. Sailors avoid its waters at night. Tourists never linger after dark, and those who have ventured inside after nightfall speak in whispers of cold hands, shadows that move on their own, and voices carried by the wind from the cliffs, voices that call out names, demanding attention, claiming the unwary. Isolation, fog, crashing waves, and the eternal light that seems to know too much. In that lighthouse, centuries of death and mystery remain alive, haunting the rocks, the wind, and the souls brave enough to enter. For decades, the lighthouse on Nova Scotia's cliffs has been a silent witness to more than storms and shipwrecks. It has borne witness to men driven to the edge of sanity, haunted by something no one else could see. Local records and journals speak of keepers who arrived full of hope, only to leave or vanish weeks later, forever changed. Some wrote of shadows moving just beyond the beam of the lantern, figures standing at the water's edge, obscured by thick fog yet unmistakably human. Others claimed they heard whispers in the wind, voices calling names, repeating secrets they had never spoken aloud. One journal, belonging to a keeper from the 1920s, describes nights spent pacing the upper deck in a fog so dense it felt alive. "The cliffs are watching," he wrote. "Figures move through the mist. They do not speak, but I hear them all the same. I do not know if they are men or something else." By the end of his journal, his writing had become erratic, lines crossing over lines, words scratched out, and the final entry: "They are waiting, always waiting. I cannot stay." Another keeper, in the 1950s, reported seeing a tall figure emerge from the fog during a violent storm. It stood at the water's edge, unmoving, glowing faintly in the lantern's reflection. The keeper tried to approach, but the figure vanished before he reached it. Following that night, he began to experience intense nightmares, imagining eyes in the fog, hands brushing against his shoulder, and hearing faint laughter echoing through the lighthouse corridors. He resigned a week later, claiming he could no longer distinguish reality from the visions the fog brought. Fog seems to play a role in the lighthouse's horror. It rolls in from the Atlantic, thick and suffocating, muting the roar of the waves, yet amplifying every creak of the old wooden structure. Shadows stretch and warp along the cliffs and stairwells. Shapes appear in the mist, sometimes distant figures, sometimes fleeting glimpses of movement at the edge of perception. Keepers often speak of being followed when they are alone, of cold air brushing their faces in rooms with no windows open, and of the lighthouse itself seeming to breathe and shift with a presence unseen. The isolation is another key element. The lighthouse sits on a rocky outcrop, far from towns, ferries, and even the coastline. In storms, it can become completely cut off for days. Keepers alone in these conditions often report heightened senses of dread, hearing footsteps echo across empty halls, doors creaking open and closed on their own, and faint murmurs carried by the wind. Over time, patterns emerge in the accounts. Figures in the fog, whispers in the dark, sudden cold spots that chill even the thickest clothing, tools and logs moving without explanation. And always, the feeling of being watched, of something unseen observing every action, waiting for the smallest mistake. Thomas, the modern-day keeper, was no different. Each night the fog crept closer. Shadows seemed to twist in impossible ways. The figures he glimpsed at the cliff edge felt alive, aware of him, patient and unmoving. The whispers became clearer. Low, guttural voices carried on the wind, sometimes mimicking his own words. By the end of the first week, the isolation, the fog, and the strange activity began to gnaw at his mind. He realized the stories were not just legends. The lighthouse was alive with something older than man, something that thrived in the storm, the mist, and the darkness. And as night fell each evening, the cliffs, the fog, and the lighthouse combined into a single, terrifying presence. A place where madness waits just beneath the crashing waves, and the light that should guide ships instead illuminates the unseen horrors lurking in the fog. The fog had settled thick and heavy that night, swallowing the cliffs and making the crashing waves sound distant and muted, like the ocean itself was holding its breath. Thomas, the keeper, climbed the spiraling staircase to the top deck, his lantern barely piercing the white mist that rolled in from the Atlantic. He wasn't alone. He could feel it. The presence that had haunted the lighthouse since the day he arrived seemed to close in around him, pressing against the walls, filling the narrow hallways with cold. Shadows stretched and twisted unnaturally along the floors, moving with a life of their own. Suddenly, a lantern on the lower landing swung violently, though there was no wind inside the tower. Thomas froze as the floorboards groaned beneath invisible weight. Then he heard it, a soft scraping, like claws against stone, echoing through the tower. He reached the top deck and looked out over the cliffs. In the swirling fog, he saw figures, tall, pale, unmoving, standing on the rocks below. They didn't move with the waves, didn't respond to the wind. They simply watched. One stepped forward, but when he blinked, it was gone. Inside the lighthouse, unexplainable phenomena intensified. Tools flew from hooks, logs and journals scattered across the floor. Pages turned on their own, revealing chilling entries from past keepers. I hear them whispering my name. They know I am alone. They are patient, waiting for my mind to break. The fog, it moves, it sees, it knows. Thomas felt a sudden cold touch on his shoulder. Spinning around, he saw nothing. The lantern flickered violently, casting shadows that stretched impossibly tall, twisting along the walls as if alive. A distant, echoing laugh carried through the fog, high-pitched, hollow, and utterly inhuman. Days later, the local authorities would discover the aftermath. Previous keepers' journals revealed similar experiences, mysterious deaths, disappearances, and inexplicable injuries. Men had vanished from the cliffs, their footprints ending abruptly in the sand. Others were found wandering along the coastline, muttering incoherently about figures in the mist, their minds fractured by what they had witnessed. Even the lighthouse itself seemed to bear witness. Lights would turn on in the dead of night with no one inside. The fog surrounding the tower seemed denser near its base, pressing against the windows like a living wall. Boats passing nearby reported strange reflections of lanterns in the fog. Yet no one was there. Thomas's own diary, found weeks later, was a testament to terror. The final entry, barely legible and smeared with seawater, read, I should not be here. They are patient, but they are not human. The fog hides them, the cliffs protect them, and the light watches me. By the time help reached him, Thomas was gone. Only the diary remained, lying open on the floor of the spiraling staircase, as if left deliberately for someone else to read, to feel the same dread, the same chilling awareness that something ancient and unseen haunted the lighthouse. The haunted lighthouse of Nova Scotia had claimed another night, another soul, another story etched into its history of fog, waves, isolation, and fear. And even now, when the wind howls and the fog rolls in thick from the Atlantic, locals swear they see the lantern lights swinging, shadows stretching along the cliffs, and figures waiting silently in the mist. Reminders that some horrors are not bound by time, and some presences never leave. Even decades later, the haunted lighthouse of Nova Scotia continues to draw attention from historians, curious travelers, and those who chase the unknown. Modern investigations have attempted to explain the eerie phenomena scientifically, but few answers satisfy those who have felt its presence firsthand. Paranormal enthusiasts visit the lighthouse, braving the foggy coastline and crashing waves to witness what some call the impossible. They bring cameras, recorders, and equipment designed to detect movement, temperature changes, and electromagnetic anomalies. Many return with footage of strange lights flickering in the mist, unexplained shadows darting across stairwells, and whispers caught on audio that cannot be explained. Local guides report that the cliffs themselves seem to pulse with an unnatural rhythm. Tourists who linger too long at night describe a sense of being watched, even when no one else is around. Some have claimed to see figures emerging from the fog, tall and pale, standing perfectly still along the jagged rocks. Others speak of hearing the echo of footsteps inside the lighthouse when it is empty, or of doors creaking open and slamming shut with no wind or human hand. Authorities maintain a cautious distance. They warn visitors to respect the cliffs and storms, citing the natural dangers of the coastline. Yet there is an unspoken acknowledgement among those who live nearby. The lighthouse is different after dark. It is not just isolation or wind. Something lingers in the fog, something that has haunted the keepers, terrified the coast, and baffled investigators for generations. Some skeptics suggest hallucinations caused by isolation, storms, or stress. Others point to legends exaggerated over time. But the consistency of the accounts, from early keepers' diaries to modern recordings, is impossible to ignore. The lighthouse has claimed lives, frayed minds, and left behind stories so chilling that anyone standing on the foggy cliffs at night can almost feel them. Paranormal enthusiasts continue to return, drawn by the thrill of the unknown. They speak of cold gusts that move against the wind, faint lights in the fog that vanish when approached, and whispers that seem to carry across both time and space. Each report, each account, reinforces the legacy of fear, isolation, and mystery. The haunted lighthouse of Nova Scotia is more than a landmark. It is a sentinel of the unknown, a place where fog, waves, and light converge to reveal that some presences are timeless, some horrors are patient, and some legends are very, very real. And even now, when the fog rolls in from the Atlantic and the lantern light swings against the storm, locals say you can feel it. The lighthouse watching, waiting, and whispering to those who dare come close. The Trans-Canada Highway, an endless ribbon of asphalt stretching across provinces, weaving through mountains, forests, and open plains. By day, it carries thousands of vehicles, commuters, travelers, truckers, each focused on their own journey. But by night, the same road transforms into a corridor of isolation, shadows stretching long and deep, hiding dangers that only appear when the world is asleep. For decades, travelers on this highway have reported encounters that defy explanation. People disappearing in the dead of night, vehicles found abandoned on empty stretches of road, and most chilling of all, the presence of a relentless pursuer, unseen but terrifyingly close. It was a dark autumn night when Lisa, a young nurse returning home from a shift in Winnipeg, first sensed it. Her car hummed along the highway, headlights cutting a narrow path through the blackness. The wind rattled the side mirrors, and trees flanking the road swayed like silent sentinels. The radio offered faint comfort, a soft talk show, low music, but it was quickly drowned out by the rhythm of her tires against the asphalt. At first, it was subtle. Shadows moving in her rearview mirror, a vehicle that seemed to appear out of nowhere behind her. A truck or a car, at first she thought, keeping pace. But something about it felt wrong. It didn't signal. It didn't pass. It simply followed. Always following. Minutes turned into hours. Each stretch of road seemed endless, unchanging. Lisa's heart pounded as she passed over isolated bridges and through dense forests where no other lights glimmered. She caught glimpses of movement. A figure on the roadside, pale and tall, watching from the trees. She blinked, and it was gone. The reports began to echo old warnings. Truckers who had traversed this highway for years spoke of the night stalker, a presence that appeared on long, empty stretches. Some described headlights that followed but never approached. Others reported phantom vehicles that disappeared when passed. And then there were those who vanished entirely, found days or weeks later, miles from their car, with no signs of struggle, only an unshakable feeling that something had pursued them relentlessly. Lisa's anxiety grew. Every shadow seemed to stretch closer. Every reflection in her mirrors seemed distorted, showing shapes that weren't her own. And then the first strike. Her rearview mirror shook violently, though no wind or vehicle was near enough to cause it. The radio crackled with static, and faint whispers threaded through the music, too soft to understand, but enough to make her heart skip. Every exit she took led to emptiness. Gas stations were shuttered, lights cold, no other vehicles in sight. The highway seemed endless, a tunnel of black asphalt and dark forests, where even the moonlight refused to penetrate. She wasn't alone. The presence on the road remained patient, invisible, but insistent, always behind her. Sometimes a shadow at the tree line, sometimes a movement in the rear view, just at the edge of perception. She tried calling for help, but no signal reached her. Her phone displayed no service. The night stretched. Every turn and hill seemed to bend time and space. Other drivers reported similar experiences. A feeling of being followed, a presence in the darkness, and a compulsion to keep moving, faster, never stopping. Some tried to outrun it, others tried to hide. Few succeeded. By the early hours, Lisa reached a rest area, heart pounding, palms sweaty. She parked under the dim lights and checked her surroundings. Nothing. Silence. But as she turned to look down the highway, she saw it. A figure, standing in the middle of the road, impossibly tall, shrouded in shadow, faceless, waiting. Her breath caught. She started the car and sped away, but when she glanced back, the figure had vanished. The Trans-Canada Highway has claimed many victims over the years. Some explained by accidents or poor visibility, others left as mysteries. Those who survived recount the same chilling patterns. A presence on the road, shadows that move unnaturally, a sensation of being hunted. The isolation of the highway at night, the endless stretches of darkness, and the empty landscapes make every trip a test of courage. And sometimes, a test of survival. Authorities warn drivers to stay alert and never travel alone at night on remote stretches. Truckers tell their own stories, sharing warnings in hushed tones at rest stops. Locals avoid certain areas after dark, especially where the road winds through dense forests or crosses bridges over misty rivers. And yet, every night, the highway waits. The asphalt stretches endlessly into darkness, carrying vehicles toward unknown fates. And for those unfortunate enough to encounter the killer, or the presence that haunts the night, they learn the same terrifying truth. On the Trans-Canada Highway, the darkness doesn't just hide danger, it hunts. The Trans-Canada Highway is more than asphalt and paint lines. It is a lifeline stretching across vast forests, mountains, and plains. By day, it hums with the rhythm of cars and trucks. But by night, the road becomes a corridor of isolation, where the slightest misstep can vanish a person without a trace. Truckers who have driven these remote stretches for decades share chilling stories. They speak of fellow drivers who never reached their destinations, their vehicles later found abandoned on desolate curves. Engines still warm, belongings untouched, as if the occupants simply vanished into the night. One trucker, Michael, recalls a night on a long wooded stretch in northern Ontario. He saw a car ahead flicker in the darkness, then disappear. only to find it later abandoned by the roadside. No tire marks, no skid marks, nothing to indicate what had happened. His radio, normally alive with chatter, fell silent. For hours, he felt an unseen presence behind him, riding the shadows, just out of reach. Travelers tell similar tales. A couple driving from Calgary to Winnipeg described seeing headlights in the distance, following them mile after mile. When they tried to pass, the lights seemed to vanish, only to appear again at the next hill. They took every exit, changed routes, but the presence never left. They eventually abandoned their journey until daylight returned, shaken and pale, aware that they had narrowly escaped something that had chosen them. Disappearances are not limited to a single province. From British Columbia to Nova Scotia, reports of missing travelers recur with alarming frequency. Cars are found in empty parking lots or pulled to the side of the road with doors wide open, meals left untouched, keys still in the ignition. Witnesses swear the missing simply melted into the shadows, claimed by a presence that no one can explain. Some claim to have seen a figure on the roadside, tall and unnervingly still, or glimpsed movement in the rearview mirror. Shapes that vanish when looked at directly. Truckers describe icy gusts and the feeling of eyes tracking their every move, even when they are alone on the longest stretches of road. The isolation of the highway magnifies the terror. Few towns dot these regions at night. Gas stations are often closed, and the dark, empty roads amplify every sound: the scrape of a branch, the rumble of tires, the whisper of the wind, into a chorus of dread. Authorities remain perplexed. Some disappearances are attributed to fatigue, accidents, or wildlife collisions. Others defy explanation entirely. Communities along the highway speak in hushed tones of the Night Stalker, a force that preys on travelers after dark, patient, relentless, and unseen. Those who survive recount the same lessons. Never drive alone at night in remote stretches, stay alert to shadows, and never ignore the instinctive feeling of being followed. For once the darkness of the Trans-Canada Highway chooses its target, escape is never guaranteed. The Trans-Canada Highway had become a nightmare corridor, where the black asphalt carried not just travelers, but fear itself. By night, long stretches of road wind through dense forests and isolated plains, and the shadows hide horrors that most only hear about in whispers. One particularly harrowing series of events began in the dead of winter. A long-haul trucker, Darren, found a vehicle abandoned at the side of the highway. The doors were open, the engine still warm, and inside, personal belongings lay scattered across the seats: wallets, bags, even a pair of gloves, but no sign of the occupants. Darren, experienced in long-haul routes, felt an unease he had never known. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Over the next few weeks, similar scenes emerged. Cars abandoned on overpasses, trucks parked along empty stretches with engines idling, and travelers nowhere to be found. The investigation revealed chilling evidence. Tire tracks indicated vehicles had veered off suddenly, but there were no corresponding skid marks, no collision damage, and no traces of struggle. Surveillance cameras at rest stops captured fleeting glimpses of shadows, tall, indistinct, moving unnaturally fast. But no faces, no license plates, no leads. Authorities tried to build suspect profiles, but nothing matched conventional criminal behavior. There was no pattern, no discernible motive, no predictable path. Witnesses who had survived described an overwhelming sense of being watched, pursued, sometimes for hours, with a presence that seemed to anticipate every move. In some cases, victims were found days later, wandering along roadside ditches, dazed, muttering about figures in black, faceless, silent, and patient. Others were never found at all. Chilling evidence kept piling up, Personal belongings placed neatly at the roadside, journal entries in cars with cryptic messages like, "Do not stop," or "They are closer than you think," and occasional scratches or dents in vehicles that could not be explained. Law enforcement found traces of clothing fibers and fingerprints that matched no one in national databases. Truckers reported seeing headlights approaching at incredible speed. Yet vehicles vanished when they tried to overtake them. Some spoke of shadows flanking their trucks along the tree line, just at the edge of their vision. Travelers recalled icy gusts that froze their limbs in the seat, whispers carried on the wind that called their names, and the horrifying feeling of someone, or something, inside their vehicle, even when alone. The highway seemed to play tricks on perception. Curves appeared longer, stretches of road seemed endless, and lights in the distance would disappear or reappear inexplicably. Those who survived said it was as if the road itself was alive, bending reality, leading them toward unseen danger. Each new discovery reinforced the terrifying truth. Whether human or something beyond comprehension, the killer, or the force haunting the highway, was patient, relentless, and always one step ahead. Every abandoned car, every missing traveler, and every unexplained mark in the snow or on the asphalt whispered the same message. Once the darkness of the Trans-Canada Highway targets you, escape is never certain. The climax of these events left the authorities and local communities on edge. Some highways were patrolled heavily at night, but the disappearances continued. Truckers altered their schedules, families warned one another, and the stories of shadows stalking lonely travelers became legend. Gruesome, unsolved, and terrifyingly real. The Trans-Canada Highway had become more than a road. It was a hunting ground, a stage for horror, and a place where the line between reality and nightmare blurred into the darkness that stretched endlessly in both directions. The terror of the Trans-Canada Highway did not end with the initial disappearances. Media outlets picked up the stories, reporting abandoned vehicles, missing travelers, and chilling accounts from survivors. Headlines warned of a night stalker along Canada's longest highway, and national news covered the strange, seemingly impossible events that continued to unfold. The highway became a place of whispered fear. Families of missing travelers waited for answers that never came. Investigators examined tire tracks, searched the roadside forests, and combed abandoned vehicles for clues. But each case grew colder, each mystery deeper. Many of the missing were never found, leaving behind only abandoned cars, cryptic messages in diaries or journals, and the unsettling knowledge that someone or something was still out there, watching the night. Survivors spoke of nights when the road itself seemed alive, when shadows twisted unnaturally and headlights appeared from nowhere, keeping pace with their vehicles. The accounts were eerily consistent, despite coming from different provinces and decades apart. A presence, patient and relentless, that seemed to hunt anyone traveling alone at night. For the communities along the highway, the legend became a permanent part of local lore. Gas stations posted warning signs, truckers avoided isolated stretches, and travelers adjusted their routes to stay in well-lit areas. Even today, people speak of the highway with caution, wary of its long curves, dense forests, and the darkness that stretches across the asphalt like a living thing. Despite all warnings, media coverage, and patrols, the killer of the Trans-Canada Highway remains unsolved. Cases pile up, abandoned vehicles remain a haunting reminder, and survivors continue to share their stories, passing the warnings to anyone daring enough to drive these lonely roads at night. The Trans-Canada Highway is more than a route. It is a corridor of fear, a stretch of isolation where shadows linger, and a chilling reminder that on some nights, darkness hunts, patience prevails, and some mysteries never end. deep within the dense forests of British Columbia, where sunlight struggles to break through thick canopies and the air is heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth, there sits a cabin unlike any other. Weathered and abandoned, it seems ordinary at first glance. A simple wooden structure, roof sagging under years of rain, windows clouded with grime. But those who have dared approach it know the truth. This cabin holds a darkness that lingers long after you leave. The story begins with a group of friends seeking solitude from the chaos of city life. They drove along narrow, winding forest roads, surrounded by towering firs and the occasional rustle of wildlife. The cabin promised a weekend of peace, far from electricity, Wi-Fi, or any hint of civilization. But as they parked and stepped into the shadowed clearing, the silence felt unnatural, too heavy, too deliberate. Birds did not sing. The wind barely stirred the branches. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Inside, the cabin smelled of mold and decay, the wooden floorboards groaning under every step. The furniture was old, covered in thick dust, and the fireplace held cold ashes from long ago. It seemed abandoned, yet the atmosphere was alive with something unseen. Shadows twisted unnaturally in the corners. A chill ran through the room, even though the autumn day was warm outside. By the first night, the subtle warnings became impossible to ignore. Strange noises echoed in the distance. The faint sound of footsteps circling the cabin, the creak of doors opening and closing on their own, and whispers carried on the wind that no one could locate. Objects inside the cabin shifted. Chairs tilted slightly, books moved from shelves, and journals appeared on tables that had been empty moments before. The group found old diaries hidden in a drawer. The entries were erratic, written by someone who had lived in the cabin decades before. The handwriting was shaky, words scratched frantically onto the page. They watch me from the trees. I hear them whispering at night. I cannot leave. They will follow. The walls are not walls. The windows do not show what is outside. The forest is alive. It takes those who linger. As the evening grew darker, the cabin seemed to close in on them. Outside, the forest became a wall of black, the trees standing like silent sentinels. Every snap of a twig made hearts race. Every shadow in the corner of the eye seemed to stretch and move. One friend swore he saw a figure at the edge of the clearing, tall, gaunt, and unmoving, watching from the trees. When he blinked, it was gone, leaving only the oppressive silence behind. By the second night, the tension escalated. Whispers grew louder, now carrying discernible words. Leave, now. Never return. Doors slammed shut as if by invisible hands. Windows rattled violently, though there was no wind. The cabin seemed to pulse with a presence that had been waiting for them. Fear turned to panic as the friends realized they were not just alone. They were being observed, hunted by something older, patient, and hidden within the forest. Attempts to leave were thwarted by the forest itself. Paths they had walked before seemed altered, trees rearranged as if guiding them back toward the cabin. Every road out felt longer, every turn brought them closer to the same clearing, the same oppressive structure. Even their vehicles seemed unresponsive at times, engines stalling, keys failing. The forest and cabin had them trapped in a web of unnatural control. The final night was the most terrifying. One of the friends disappeared, leaving behind only a shoe in the clearing and a lingering scream that faded into the wind. The remaining group huddled inside the cabin, lights flickering from the storm outside, shadows dancing wildly across the walls that no longer seemed solid. The diaries suggested this was not the first disappearance. and the cabin's dark history seemed alive, claiming new souls in a cycle as old as the forest. When they finally escaped with the morning light, the cabin appeared distant, smaller, almost innocent in the bright sun. But the memory of the cold, the whispers, and the shadows lingered, etched into their minds. Locals avoid the area now, warning that the dense forests of British Columbia are not just home to wildlife. They are home to the inexplicable, the unseen, and the places where darkness waits patiently for those who wander too far. The creepy cabin remains a chilling mystery, an isolated structure in the heart of an ancient forest, alive with a presence that has defied explanation for decades. And for those who have been near it, the sense of being watched, the whispers in the trees, and the cold touch of something unseen remain with them forever. The forest surrounding the cabin seemed alive in ways that no ordinary wilderness should be. Visitors reported an oppressive silence, broken only by whispers carried on the wind, rustling leaves that sounded like distant footsteps, and the faint creak of branches that appeared and vanished without pattern. The air grew heavy with anticipation, as if the trees themselves were holding a secret. Some vacationers claimed they saw strange symbols etched into the bark of the surrounding trees, circles, lines, and jagged markings that seemed too precise to be natural. Others discovered them scratched into the cabin walls, hidden under layers of dust and cobwebs. The symbols appeared overnight, as if drawn by unseen hands, and each observer described a creeping sensation of being watched whenever they looked upon them. Shadowy movements added to the fear. At the edge of the clearing, shapes flitted between trees, impossible to focus on, disappearing when approached. Figures seemed to stretch unnaturally, then shrink back into the darkness, just at the corner of vision. Visitors reported glimpsing them in mirrors and windows, only to find empty spaces when they turned to face the source directly. Odd sounds filled the air, too subtle to locate, but impossible to ignore. Soft footsteps circled the cabin at night, scraping floorboards and echoing through the trees. Whispers, indistinct yet urgent, warned of unseen presences, repeating phrases in voices too low and distant to recognize. Leave. Leave now. Or, you should not be here. Even the wind seemed to carry intention, gusts brushing against the cabin walls as though something was testing the boundaries between the inside and outside. Inside the cabin, objects shifted subtly. Chairs tipped slightly, journals moved across tables, and the faint smell of smoke or decaying wood appeared where none should have been. Guests spoke of hearing distant laughter, low and hollow, carried through the dense forest. Even in daylight, the clearing seemed smaller, shadows thicker, and the air heavier, as though the forest itself had grown impatient with trespassers. Visitors left with stories of lingering unease. They spoke of the cabin as though it were alive, feeding off fear, with the forest as its accomplice. Even after leaving, many reported dreams of tall, indistinct figures in the trees, symbols glowing faintly in the dark, and whispers calling their names across vast, empty spaces. The creepy cabin was no ordinary retreat. It was a place where isolation, darkness, and the dense British Columbia forest converged to create an atmosphere of constant vigilance and dread. Every shadow, every sound, every symbol seemed to serve as a warning. Intruders were not welcome, and the forest would ensure that they never forgot the encounter. As the visitors explored the cabin further, the air grew colder, heavier, almost tangible in its oppressive weight. Every floorboard creaked underfoot, echoing through the silence of the dense British Columbia forest. The forest outside seemed to press against the windows, black and unmoving, its shadows stretching unnaturally into the clearing. It began with a faint draft in the corner of the main room, One of the vacationers noticed a slight gap in the floorboards. Kneeling down, their fingers brushed against something unexpected. A latch hidden beneath years of dust and grime. Trembling, they lifted it, revealing a narrow stairway descending into darkness. The smell that rose from below was sharp, acrid, like damp earth mixed with smoke, and it carried an undeniable sense of age and menace. The hidden room was small, windowless, and lined with crude shelves. There they found artifacts that sent chills down their spines. Old dolls with cracked faces, human-shaped carvings, and journals bound in leather, yellowed with age. Pages detailed past inhabitants' obsessions, rituals performed in the dead of night, symbols etched into walls and trees, and the names of those who had vanished in the surrounding forest. One journal entry read, "The cabin watches. It chooses. The forest listens. Those who stay too long do not leave." As they continued searching, the visitors discovered another chamber hidden behind a false wall. This room was darker, colder, and the air hung thick with the metallic tang of something long decayed. Scratches marred the wooden walls, and dried stains hinted at acts of violence long forgotten. The oppressive silence was broken only by the occasional drip of water from a leaking ceiling, each sound amplified, echoing as though the cabin itself were breathing. Outside, the dense forest seemed to grow restless. Branches scratched against the cabin walls, shadows moved with impossible speed, and faint whispers carried through the trees. Leave, or become part of it. Panic set in as the visitors realized the cabin was more than abandoned. It was alive with the residue of past horrors. One guest swore a figure emerged from the shadows, tall, gaunt, and faceless, hovering at the edge of the clearing. They blinked, and it was gone, leaving only the weight of its gaze, as though the cabin itself were judging them for their intrusion. The violent history of the cabin became undeniable. Old photographs, hidden beneath floorboards, showed previous occupants who had vanished, their expressions frozen in terror. Tools and weapons left behind hinted at dark rituals and desperate attempts to protect, or perhaps summon, the forest's unseen inhabitants. Every artifact, every hidden room, told the same story. Those who entered without understanding the cabin's power risked never leaving. When the visitors finally fled at dawn, the forest appeared calm once more, sunlight filtering through the dense canopy. But the memory of the hidden rooms, the eerie artifacts, and the violent history lingered. Even miles away, they reported the whispers following them, the sense of unseen eyes tracking their movements, and dreams filled with the forest's shadows. The creepy cabin in British Columbia had revealed its deepest secrets, a place where darkness, violence, and the unknown converged, leaving all who entered changed forever. The forest remained patient, the shadows watchful, and the cabin waiting for the next curious souls brave or foolish enough to enter. The creepy cabin in British Columbia did not fade from memory once the visitors fled. Instead, it became a local legend, whispered among townspeople, hikers, and forestry workers. Few dare venture near the dense forest where it stands, and those who do often report an immediate sense of unease, as if the trees themselves are warning them away. The silence in the forest is heavy, almost suffocating, broken only by the occasional rustle of unseen creatures or the faint creak of distant floorboards carried on the wind. Investigators who have examined the cabin are baffled. Every attempt to document the hidden rooms and artifacts yields more questions than answers. Symbols etched in walls and trees appear to shift over time, vanishing or changing orientation when left unobserved. Evidence of previous occupants, journals, and unsettling carvings point to a violent and mysterious past. yet no records exist to explain the disappearances. Law enforcement, paranormal researchers, and historians alike are left with a single, unsettling conclusion. The cabin is not simply abandoned. It is a presence. Local guides warn hikers and vacationers never to approach the clearing. Truckers passing through the area report noticing the forest darken unnaturally at night, and campers near the vicinity recount hearing whispers, footsteps, and fleeting shadows. Some have even claimed that the cabin seems to move slightly, shifting its position when unobserved, as if it refuses to be fully understood. The legend has grown over the years. Stories of vanishings, strange symbols, and shadowy movements circulate online and in local folklore, each account reinforcing the cabin's reputation as a place where the natural and supernatural intertwine. Even those who view it from a distance speak of a chill that runs through their bones, a sense that they are being watched, and a silent warning to turn back. The creepy cabin remains a puzzle, defying conventional explanation. Investigators are left with fragments of horror, hidden rooms, eerie artifacts, and evidence of violent histories that cannot be verified. The forest keeps its secrets well, shrouded in shadows, dense foliage, and silence that presses down on anyone who dares enter. And so the cabin waits, patient, watching. A chilling reminder that some places are best left alone. Some forests harbor memories that should never be uncovered, and some legends are terrifyingly real. Those who have survived tell the tale, but the forest keeps the rest, holding its mysteries tightly within the dense British Columbia wilderness. In the rolling hills and dense woods of rural Quebec, small towns hide secrets that few outsiders ever glimpse. Beneath the surface of quiet streets and friendly neighbors, whispers persist of a shadowy presence, a cult operating in secrecy, untouched by law and shrouded in fear. Locals speak of it only in hushed tones, their eyes darting to the forest edges or down narrow alleyways, as though acknowledging the cult aloud might summon it closer. It began with subtle hints. Missing pets, strange symbols painted on fences or carved into trees, and reports of unusual gatherings at night. Farmers noticed figures moving silently through fields, their identities hidden beneath cloaks, carrying torches that flickered through the fog. The air itself seemed to hold a sense of unease, thick and heavy, as though the town had inhaled the cult's presence and could never fully exhale. Tourists and new residents often felt the unease immediately. A quiet street could seem unnaturally still. Shadows in alleyways moved against the wind. Doors were found unlocked, only to be locked again by unseen hands. Windows revealed silhouettes of figures observing from the darkness, vanishing whenever approached. Even daytime held attention, an invisible pressure that made the hair on the back of the neck stand on end. The psychological impact was profound. Children whispered of voices in the woods, recounting encounters with hooded figures, chanting incomprehensible words. Adults, at first skeptical, reported dreams that seemed to mirror the cult's activities. Rituals, chanting, and faces masked in darkness. The fear of the unknown spread faster than any evidence could be documented. The very thought of the cult sufficed to make townspeople change routines, lock doors, and avoid the woods after sundown. Journalists and investigators who tried to uncover the truth faced obstacles at every turn. Locals were tight-lipped, some refusing to speak even under oath. Surveillance revealed faint glimpses of gatherings in abandoned barns or secluded clearings, with circles of fire and figures moving rhythmically. But the identities of participants remained obscured. Every lead dissolved into whispers, legends, and vague recollections that never fully aligned. Stories of disappearances added to the terror. People who had questioned too closely or ventured into restricted areas were reported missing. Some returned days later, disoriented and silent, speaking only of shadows and chanting that seemed to follow them beyond the woods. Others were never seen again, leaving the town with a lingering unease and unanswered questions. The fear was contagious. Neighbors became wary of one another. Lights in windows were left on through the night. Dogs barked incessantly, as if sensing presences invisible to human eyes. The small town became a pressure cooker of suspicion, dread, and paranoia, all stemming from an enigmatic, pervasive darkness hidden in the woods. Authorities struggled to intervene. Without concrete evidence, the cult remained untouchable, a phantom menace feeding on secrecy and fear. Investigators could document symbols, find traces of gatherings, and hear witness accounts. But the core, who ran it, what they believed, and what they intended, remained elusive. The disturbing cult of Quebec thrives on more than rituals and secrecy. It thrives on fear itself. Each whispered story, each missing person, each shadow glimpsed in the woods strengthens its grip. Locals continue to live with an unspoken rule: avoid the woods after dark, question nothing, and respect the invisible line separating ordinary life from the cult's shadowy influence. In Quebec's quiet, rural towns, darkness is patient. It hides in the trees, in the alleyways, in the corners of abandoned barns. And the cult waits, watching, ready to envelop anyone foolish enough to cross its path or curious enough to look too closely. The town of rural Quebec began to feel smaller, tighter, as the cult's presence grew more undeniable. Witnesses spoke of people vanishing in the night, leaving behind only open doors, overturned chairs, or personal belongings strewn across the forest floor. There was no sign of struggle, no tracks leading into or out of the dense woods. Only the eerie certainty that someone had been taken by a force unseen yet deliberate. Residents described strange rituals in the woods. Figures cloaked in dark robes would appear at twilight, gathering in circles around flickering fires. Witnesses recounted chanting in languages no one recognized, rhythms that seemed to seep into the soil itself, and movements so precise and synchronized it felt unnatural, as though the forest bent to the cult's will. Flickering torches cast shadows that danced in impossible patterns, elongating and twisting across the trees, reaching out toward anyone who dared observe. Threats, both subtle and direct, began to unsettle the townspeople. One witness reported hearing a whisper behind them while walking home. "Leave or join us." Another found a crude symbol scratched into the door of their home, a jagged circle with lines radiating outward, accompanied by a faint scent of smoke. Even those who had not seen the cult firsthand felt its presence. The constant pressure of unseen eyes, the sensation that the shadows themselves had intent. Children were the first to voice true terror. They spoke of hooded figures watching from the tree line, of chanting that entered their dreams, and of people disappearing during seemingly ordinary walks to nearby fields or forests. Their fear was raw and instinctive, a warning adults could not ignore. Yet skepticism often gave way to dread as more disappearances occurred. Rumors spread faster than authorities could respond. Locals whispered of initiations and offerings carried out under the cover of night. Small groups attempted to investigate, only to return pale, shaken, and unable to articulate fully what they had seen. The forest itself seemed to resist intrusion. Paths shifted, shadows blocked view, and faint, haunting music or chanting carried on the wind, always just beyond reach. The psychological weight of the cult's presence seeped into daily life. Neighbors distrusted one another, doors were double locked, and nights were spent in constant vigilance. Fear became a companion, a lens through which every sound, every movement, Every distant rustle of leaves was interpreted as a possible threat. The line between reality and paranoia blurred, and the small town's collective psyche became a breeding ground for dread. With each disappearance, each ritual glimpsed, and each whispered threat, the cult's power over the town solidified. No one knew the extent of its reach, the nature of its practices, or the identity of those orchestrating its ceremonies. And yet, everyone understood the same unspoken truth. Curiosity about the cult was dangerous, and defiance could mean vanishing into the night, never to be seen again. After months of whispered fears, disappearances, and mounting witness reports, authorities finally launched a coordinated raid on the suspected cult's hidden compound deep within the forests of rural Quebec. The operation, planned under heavy secrecy, was meant to uncover the truth. Yet what they found was far beyond anything anticipated. As officers approached the clearing, the forest seemed to react. Trees swayed unnaturally despite the still air, shadows shifted with impossible speed, and the crunch of leaves underfoot echoed like distant whispers. From the tree line, hooded figures watched silently, disappearing when officers drew near. Even seasoned investigators felt the oppressive weight of fear pressing down, a psychological suffocation that seemed almost alive. Inside the compound, horrors became tangible. Dark robes were strewn across the floor. Altars covered in unidentifiable substances lined hidden rooms, and walls were scrawled with symbols that seemed to pulse in the dim light. In one room, diaries and journals detailed months of ritualistic activities, initiations, sacrifices, and instructions for manipulating fear in victims. The pages contained chilling accounts of townspeople who had vanished, described in meticulous detail. Their last moments, the cult's ceremonies, and the psychological torment inflicted upon them. Testimonies from captured members were even more disturbing. They spoke in monotone, recounting nights of chanting beneath flickering fires, obedience enforced through terror, and the cult's belief that darkness could be harnessed to dominate minds. Officers reported a strange synchronicity among the members, a collective eeriness that defied ordinary explanation, as if their thoughts and intentions were intertwined. Some even insisted that the forest itself responded to their rituals, carrying messages in whispers and shadows. Evidence of physical abuse and psychological manipulation was everywhere. Hidden rooms contained restraints, instruments, and objects marked with symbols indicating dark intentions. Some rooms had faint traces of blood, long dried, while walls displayed warnings in a language none of the investigators could read. The chilling realization was unanimous. The cult's practices were calculated, methodical, and profoundly inhuman. Even outside the compound, the forest retained its oppressive presence. Officers spoke of strange lights flickering through the trees, voices carried on the wind, and the unsettling sensation of unseen eyes tracking their every movement. Survivors of prior cult encounters, those who had escaped the forests before, testified to being followed, haunted by visions and whispers that no one else could. The raid confirmed the town's worst fears. The cult was real, active, and responsible for a string of disappearances and psychological torment that spanned months, possibly years. Yet even with arrests and evidence seized, the sense of fear did not dissipate. Locals reported that rituals had left residual shadows, lingering in homes, fields, and forest edges. The psychological impact persisted. The small town of Quebec was forever altered by the knowledge that a hidden darkness had been operating in their midst. Patient, precise, and terrifyingly real. The disturbing cult of Quebec had been exposed, but the horror remained. Witnesses spoke of dreams filled with chanting, unexplained whispers, and fleeting shadows in the corners of their vision. Authorities remained baffled by the cult's reach and organization. And the forest, as always, waited silently, its secrets unbroken, its presence a chilling reminder that some darkness can never be fully eradicated. The raid had revealed horrors beyond imagination, but the story did not end when the cult members were apprehended. Courtrooms were filled with testimonies that sent chills through jurors, lawyers, and townspeople alike. Survivors recounted nights of terror in whispered voices, describing rituals, chants, and threats that left them scarred for life. Their accounts painted a picture of manipulation and psychological control so meticulous it was difficult to comprehend. Investigations continued for months. Authorities sifted through mountains of evidence. Ritual sites, journals, and hidden rooms, each revealing further layers of the cult's operations. Despite arrests and prosecutions, questions remained unanswered. Some disappearances could not be linked to any known suspect. Symbols and markings found in the forest continued to appear inexplicably, and witnesses claimed that unsettling whispers followed them even after leaving the area. The psychological impact on the community was profound. Fear lingered in every corner of the town, a quiet pressure that made ordinary streets feel suffocating. Parents warned their children to never venture into the woods alone. Neighbors eyed one another with suspicion, haunted by the realization that the cult had been operating in their midst for years. Even routine walks past the forest's edge became exercises in vigilance, as shadows and strange noises kept the town in a state of perpetual unease. Local media reported extensively, sharing the horrifying details of the cult's practices. But with each story, the sense of dread only deepened. The forest surrounding the town became synonymous with danger. Its dense trees and hidden clearings were no longer just wilderness. They were reminders that evil could thrive in the most unexpected places. Though some members faced justice, the town never fully recovered. Trauma lingered like a permanent fog. Dreams were haunted by chanting and hooded figures. Adults and children alike reported feeling watched, hearing whispers in empty rooms, and sensing presences that defied explanation. Even years later, the events remained etched in the collective memory of the community, a chilling proof that fear, once sown, can persist long after the threat appears to be gone. The disturbing cult of Quebec had left its mark. A town forever changed, secrets partially uncovered, and a forest that still waits patiently for the curious, the skeptical, or the unwary. Darkness had descended once, and even with the light of justice, its shadow remained. In the heart of Winnipeg, hidden among overgrown streets and forgotten back roads, stand the decaying remains of mental asylums long closed to the public. Brick walls crumble, windows are shattered or boarded up, and rusted gates swing with the wind. But the most unsettling feature of these abandoned places is not the decay. It is the lingering presence of lives forgotten, echoing through empty halls in the form of memories, whispers, and sometimes screams that never left. These asylums were once homes to thousands, many suffering from illnesses that were misunderstood, neglected, or mistreated. Patients were confined for months, years, or decades. Their stories of despair, isolation, and anguish remain embedded in the very walls, refusing to be erased. Visitors who dare to enter report a heavy atmosphere, as if the air itself is soaked with sorrow. Footsteps echo in corridors where no one walks, and shadows stretch along cracked walls, moving in ways that defy natural light. The first hint of the asylum's dark legacy comes from locals' accounts. People describe lights flickering behind boarded windows or faint cries carried on the wind during late-night walks nearby. Some claim to see figures through shattered glass, patients frozen in time, staring out with hollow eyes, their mouths opening in silent pleas. Even those who have never entered the buildings sense the oppressive energy, a palpable despair that hangs over the surrounding streets. Explorers who enter the asylums often speak of immediate unease. Floors groan underfoot, carrying the weight of decades. The air is thick, musty with mold and decay, yet laced with the faint metallic tang of blood long dried. Doorways appear to shift, corridors stretch longer than they should, and rooms seem to rearrange themselves, trapping visitors in a labyrinth that disorients and frightens. Every creak, drip, or whisper sends the heart racing, each sound magnified by the oppressive silence. Some claim to have encountered apparitions, patients in tattered clothing, wandering the halls as if searching for lost loved ones or forgotten lives. Others report the sudden appearance of doors slamming shut behind them, unseen hands brushing against their shoulders, or fleeting glimpses of faces peering from corners where no one could be. The line between reality and imagination blurs. The asylums seem to feed on fear, intensifying every heartbeat, every shiver, every instinct that screams, "Get out." Evidence of the asylum's violent and neglectful past is everywhere. Rusted restraints, broken beds, and remnants of medical equipment litter hidden rooms. Journals, faded and torn, describe the treatment of patients, the experiments conducted in secrecy, and the despair that led some to vanish entirely. Some walls still bear faint, desperate messages scratched by hands long gone, words pleading for help etched into the decaying plaster. "Let me out, don't forget me, help." Nightfall brings the most intense experiences. Explorers report hearing chants, screams, and the low hum of voices carried through the empty halls. Shadows twist and elongate, forming shapes that seem to observe, follow, and sometimes reach out. The very air feels alive with grief, anger, and memory. Many leave shaken, claiming to feel an invisible weight following them back into the streets, a reminder that the asylum's ghosts never truly leave. Despite decades of abandonment, Winnipeg's asylums continue to draw attention from paranormal enthusiasts, historians, and thrill seekers. Some claim photographic evidence of apparitions or capture EVPs, electronic voice phenomena, of patients speaking from beyond. Others insist that the buildings themselves resist intrusion, rearranging interiors, amplifying fears, and ensuring that no one fully comprehends the scale of suffering once endured inside. The ghosts of Winnipeg's abandoned asylums are more than mere stories. They are echoes of forgotten lives, reminders of the cruelty and neglect humans can inflict, and proof that places saturated with despair do not easily relinquish their hold. Even today, the streets around the ruins carry a chill, a lingering sadness, and the knowledge that the past, though buried, continues to watch, whisper, and haunt all who dare to enter. The asylum's reputation for haunting drew the attention of paranormal investigators from across Canada. Equipped with cameras, voice recorders, and thermal sensors, they ventured into the decaying halls in search of evidence. What they captured was unsettling. Flickering shadows moving against the grain of their video, doors opening and closing by themselves, and objects shifting without explanation. Static-filled audio recordings revealed faint voices whispering incoherent words, cries of anguish, and the occasional chilling scream that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Former staff members added a grim layer to the asylum's dark history. Nurses and attendants recalled patients vanishing from wings, only to be discovered days later in strange, remote corners. Their behavior altered in ways that defied reason. Some described encounters with patients who insisted the building itself spoke to them, commanding obedience or sowing terror. Even retired staff, long removed from the asylums, reported nightmares and unsettling dreams tied to the wards they once worked in, as though the air of despair had seeped into their very memory. Visitors who dared to enter during the day felt an oppressive weight pressing down, a silence so thick it seemed to muffle their own thoughts. At night, the phenomena intensified. Footsteps echoed through empty hallways, lights flickered despite functioning wiring, and cold drafts swept through rooms with no doors or windows open. Shadowy figures were glimpsed at the edge of vision, disappearing when approached, leaving only the echo of movement and the sensation of being watched. Some investigators reported sudden drops in temperature in certain rooms, localized to a few feet, accompanied by an eerie humming sound. Cameras captured shapes indistinct and fleeting, figures bending unnaturally, or faces appearing in broken windows that were entirely opaque in daylight. Others experienced physical sensations, brushes against their shoulders, unseen hands tugging at clothing, or an inexplicable heaviness pressing on the chest, as if the building itself was testing their courage. Even the environment outside the asylums contributed to the mounting tension. Overgrown weeds clawed at pathways, fallen debris shifted without wind, and the surrounding streets carried an unsettling hush. Locals claimed to hear cries at night, faint and sorrowful, though the buildings were locked and abandoned. Dogs and other animals avoided the area entirely, sensing the residual anguish that lingered like a shadow over the ruins. Every account, every recording, every photograph seemed to corroborate the same terrifying truth. The asylums were far from empty. The memories of those who suffered within the walls had taken root, manifesting as ghostly phenomena that defied explanation. The line between history and haunting blurred, leaving investigators, staff, and even casual visitors with an undeniable sense of dread and despair. The ghosts of Winnipeg's abandoned asylums had awakened, and those who entered soon realized that the building's stories were not just in the past. They were alive, observing, and ready to remind the living of the horrors endured behind its decaying walls. Inside the crumbling halls of Winnipeg's abandoned asylums, the weight of forgotten suffering reached a crescendo. Investigators, urban explorers, and even local historians spoke of moments when the buildings seemed to awaken around them. Footsteps echoed down long corridors where no one walked, and doors slammed shut with violent force, trapping those inside in oppressive darkness. The air was thick with a cold that seemed to cling to the bones, and every shadow stretched unnaturally, bending reality itself. Visitors reported hearing voices in rooms long empty, whispers pleading for help, cries of anguish, and fragments of conversations that made no sense. Sometimes these voices would speak directly to them, calling their names, recounting past traumas of unseen patients, or issuing warnings: leave or stay forever. The sense of being observed was constant. Even in the brightest daylight, explorers felt the gaze of countless unseen eyes tracking their every movement. Some claimed to witness figures appearing suddenly, their forms indistinct but terrifyingly human. They lurked at the edge of vision, moving in jerky, unnatural ways, only to vanish when approached. Shadows seemed to gather in corners, bending and twisting with intent. The most chilling accounts described patients vanishing from sight entirely. One moment present, the next gone, as if the building itself had swallowed them. Investigators who attempted to follow were met with empty hallways and the echo of their own panic. Physical phenomena intensified. Cold drafts whipped through corridors, doors banged against walls, and objects fell from shelves without explanation. Cameras captured fleeting shapes, tall figures, often hooded or faceless, moving silently through rooms. Recordings picked up faint chanting, sometimes in French, sometimes in incomprehensible tones, layering on top of the cries and whispers. Explorers often felt hands brush against them, a sudden pressure on their chests, or the sensation of being pulled into darkness, though no one else was nearby. The asylum's history of vanishing patients became terrifyingly tangible. Reports of former occupants disappearing without trace now mirrored the experiences of investigators. Rooms once thought empty echoed with footsteps, cries, and the faint scent of decay, as if time itself carried forward the suffering of those long gone. Shadows pooled and flickered, forming shapes that hinted at figures sitting, crouching, or watching silently. The building seemed alive, feeding on fear, amplifying every heartbeat, and pressing relentlessly on the psyche of anyone inside. By the climax of these encounters, the boundaries between past and present dissolved. The asylums did not simply house memories, they embodied them. Every vanished patient, every whispered plea, and every shadowy figure contributed to an atmosphere so thick with despair that explorers often fled, pale and trembling, carrying the weight of the building's horrors long after leaving. Winnipeg's abandoned asylums had proven one truth beyond doubt. The suffering endured within their walls was not gone. It lingered, manifesting as vanishing patients, echoing voices, and shadowy figures, ensuring that the ghosts of the past continued to haunt the living, demanding remembrance, and feeding on the terror of all who dared enter. The asylums of Winnipeg have long since closed their doors, officially abandoned and sealed off from the public. Yet the stories of what transpired within their crumbling walls refuse to fade. Locals continue to speak in hushed tones of flickering lights, distant cries, and shadowy figures glimpsed in windows long boarded up. Even years after the last patient walked or disappeared within the halls, the buildings exude an atmosphere of despair that seems to seep into the surrounding streets. Paranormal investigators return periodically, drawn by the allure of the unknown, reporting experiences as chilling as those of the past. Equipment malfunctions, unexplained voices, and ghostly apparitions persist, leaving experts baffled and convinced that the asylums are more than mere buildings. They are vessels of residual anguish, echoing the suffering of those once confined. Visitors often describe an immediate heaviness upon approaching the site, a sense of being watched, and an instinctive urge to leave before the walls claim their attention. Even outside the asylums, the legacy of despair lingers. Residents nearby speak of hearing faint whispers at night, of feeling sudden chills or glimpsing shadows move against the natural light. Stories circulate of explorers who left abruptly, pale and trembling, claiming the asylum's ghosts followed them home in their dreams, whispering, watching, and refusing to be forgotten. The fear is enduring because the asylum's history is steeped in real suffering. The vanished patients, the mistreatment, and the isolation left a mark that no closure could erase. The buildings are silent in form, yet their presence is deafening in essence, a reminder that some places cannot relinquish the anguish trapped within their walls. To this day, Winnipeg's abandoned asylums serve as a warning. Some doors, once opened, should remain closed. Some histories once lived refuse to be forgotten. And some ghosts, born of pain and despair, are patient enough to wait indefinitely, ensuring that the terror endured by the living and the dead is never truly over. The asylums are empty, yet the ghosts remain. And for anyone who ventures too close, the echoes of the past are never far behind. Canada is a land of breathtaking landscapes, quiet towns, and icy wilderness. To the unknowing eye, it appears peaceful, serene, and untouched. But as we've seen tonight, beneath the beauty lie shadows. Secrets that linger in forests, abandoned buildings, desolate highways, and forgotten corners of towns. The stories of missing campers, urban phantoms, haunted lighthouses, secretive cults, and abandoned asylums remind us that terror often wears the mask of calm. These are not just stories. They are warnings. They show us that darkness can hide where we least expect it, and that some horrors are closer than we think. The fear, despair, and mystery explored tonight are very real, lingering in the memories of those who survived, and in the spaces where the vanished or the lost left their mark. If you dare, share your own Canadian horror experiences in the comments below, because sometimes the most peaceful places hide the darkest horrors. And perhaps your story could be the next shadow we uncover. Stay vigilant, and remember, even in the quietest corners of the world, fear never truly sleeps.